Good afternoon. Welcome to Civic Sparks. We got a great show for you. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to 423 Media for giving us all the fun graphics and everything we need for the show tonight. And let's introduce our guest, Mr. Jonathan Feldman, CIO for the city of city of Asheville, North Carolina. How you doing, Jonathan?
I'm well. I hear that the city of Chattanooga job is filled by somebody else, not Jonathan Feldman.
Oh,
But I'm glad to be at the city of Asheville and glad to be on the show.
good. Well, welcome. Uh, First of all, let's just start off with a question I ask all my guests, and that is to know you a little better. What brought you to Asheville, and what drove you to being so passionate about the public sector?
Well, to be honest, I was recruited into Asheville, but when I arrived, I made it my business to get really educated about municipal government and about civics. And to that end, I went to University of North Carolina School of Government courses and all that kind of stuff. And along the way, uh, I find that technology is never effective when you don't like what you're doing. And I discovered I really liked civics. I really liked the ability to have an effect where I live to make the community better. So really, that's why I stayed.
And Asheville's such a wonderful city too. I was just there a couple hours ago, in fact, and I'm there quite frequently, as you know. You and I go and have coffee occasionally and spend some time, talking about this kind of stuff up there in Asheville. It's a wonderful little town. If you've not been to Asheville, I suggest that get on a plane, go to Asheville, North Carolina. It's a great place. So let's talk a little bit about leadership and digital transformation. I think leadership techniques have come a long way since the days of our parents and grandparents. Do we see this trend shifting in the public sector space yet, or is it still kind of lagging behind?
Well, this is one of those it depends, Brent, because it depends where you are. If if you're at a city, county, state that is still sort of in command and control instead of cooperation, collaboration, and communication, then that's how things are going to be. But as it turns out, funny thing, there's something called social Darwinism in this age of digital disruption. And when folks, and there's nothing wrong with command and control, okay? Firefighters have command and control, police officers have command and control, folks in the military have command and
Military,
control.
yes.
And and they need it, right? There's life safety on the line every single day. But when you're not in a paramilitary or military field, as Daniel Pink has famously said, folks are looking for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And that's really hard to get uh, if you're just purely in a command and control environment. And in fact, the best paramilitary folks that I know do offer that autonomy, mastery, and purpose to the extent that they can, right?
Sure.
So I think it depends. I think it's all about who you're working for, who's your boss, who are your top leaders.
Sure. As somebody, a veteran myself, I know that there's a time and place for command and control. And,
Sure.
when people's lives are on the line and when, things like that, typically tends to be a better style and it works well. But even the military's changed in the sense that now they're actually, my brother's a major in the Army, actually. And he's, they've changed a lot since the days that I was in the 90s to where it was very much command and control, an old style of I say jump, you say how high, yes, sir. And now to more, they're spending a lot of time sending officers to leadership classes and even NCOs to leadership classes to learn how to better deal with different personalities and how to deal with the soldiers a little better. And it seems to be working out well for them. So I'm hoping that when you and I have seen this trend go on in the public sector as well, to be able to see some shifts in that area. And Dr. Reichenthal spoke with me last week about the fourth industrial revolution and the public sector and where things kind of go from a digital transformation standpoint. And I think leadership really has a key role in that, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think leadership has a role in any place that we're going, right? If we're going to digital transformation, leadership's key. Fourth industrial revolution may be upon us. whether or not we decide to do anything about it. But the way we respond, the way we react, the way we work, the way we play, the way we relax, and the way we learn is all has to do with leadership. If your boss tells you, hey, you have to have this training class, and puts his or her thumb on you and says, go, 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 you're probably not as invested in that training class as if you say to yourself, well, gosh, this is a good training class. It would be beneficial to me. It would be fun. I would learn something cool. It would be good for my career. So, I think leadership is tied up in everything we do, from parenting to, how we collaborate in the office. And leadership is not just for the folks who are given the orders or making the requests. Leadership is for everyone at the organization, Brent.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter what position you're in, you can still be a leader. You don't even have to be a manager or supervisor to be a leader. You can lead from all angles. And I like to encourage that amongst staff myself, and I know you do as well. But I think there's still this stigma, like you mentioned about the training courses. I was in a training course a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed that a lot of the people that were in the same course is a certification course that I was going through with some of my staff who actually went through. I was like, hey, well, why not? I'll do it as with you. My staff were not expected to work. They were expected to train. They were expected to learn and to
Right.
spend their time, right? So not checking emails, not calling the boss, not doing this stuff. And I see a lot of that with other agencies, to where, they're training, but they're not really paying attention. They're not really learning. They're still checking emails. They're still answering phone calls because they're getting a text message from their boss saying, I need this to be done. How can we, is there anything that we can do? As leaders, obviously, we can change that paradigm on our own, but how do we get that message across to other leaders that that's really not the best way to
Well,
do
give me a second. I need to answer this text.
it?
I'm kidding.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? We live in the age of distraction, man.
Sure.
And I think, if anything, the pandemic has made it worse, not better. And I
Fair point.
think, again, it's about folks' level of engagement. We have all those distractions, but are folks in that training class, do they know it's key to the mission? Are they bought into the mission? Do they give a crap about the mission? It's all those things. And frankly, is the training any good? Is it engaging? Is it just rote, or is it trying to teach you something, make you have a little fun? Or is it just cramming crap into your head?
Right.
Come on. Think about your best teachers. Your best teachers were engaging. Your best teachers might have been a little crazy.
Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely right. I do remember a lot of my teachers in high school and middle school, and I remember the ones that were horrible, and I don't remember a whole lot about them other than that were horrible. But you remember all the good stuff and the things that you did learn well, and you remember those people and you never forget them. So that's a good point. I think leaders can be like that as well, right? I used to tell folks all the time that what made George Washington a great leader? Was it the fact that he was this wise general? Was it the fact that he knew a lot about military tactics and things like that? No. What made him a good leader was the fact that he listened to his staff and he trusted his staff. And even if he did make a decision and say, hey, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take this hill. We're going to do this. And somebody says, I don't know about that. That's not a great idea. Maybe we should try this tactic instead. He listened, he understood, and he thought about those things. And he made decisions based on the reality of the situation, not just because it was him being the leader and he wanted to make the decision. So
and we talked about command and control, Brent, but I think there's a great video out there by a submarine commander who talks about, and one of the key messages is, I put the decision where the knowledge was.
Right.
And that actually was better for our submarine. Put that decision where the knowledge is. I'm the captain. I can't possibly know what's on the radar. And so, decision to move forward based on the sonar. So I think that concept of, your folks might actually know something, your best folks, right? Which are, by the way, who we want to retain.
Absolutely.
And so your best folks know their business better than you know their business.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they know their jobs real well, and that's our job, is to support them. In my opinion, as a leader, they don't work for us; we work for them. We knock down the walls, we knock down the barriers, we go through all the rigmarole. We have the power and the authority to go up the chain of command and say, hey, we need this, we need that, and get the stuff out of their way and let them do their jobs.
I mean, I look at it a little differently, Brent. I think that we work together. I think we collaborate. I think we each have a role. We each have a responsibility. Um, I think of it more like a conductor in an orchestra. If the conductor starts to boss folks around, the conductor doesn't know how to play the cello and the violin and the viola and the oboe, but the conductor sure knows how to get folks together and collaborate to make an amazing symphony sound great.
That's right.
So, I mean, that's how I think about it. Is we all work together. There's times for leadership. There's times for central coordination. There's times for decentralized activity. But for me, it's about a coordination role. It's about leader as chief storyteller. It's leader, and I'm not talking about platitudes, and I'm not talking about gee, everything's great, and we all need to be inspired by cranking out whatever thingamajigs our business cranks out. But a good leader is going to find those stories that tie people together. A good leader is going to find those bright spots that exist in the organization where people feel that camaraderie, that fellowship, and recognize it and tell that story. And here's what we know as leaders: what gets recognized and rewarded gets repeated.
That's true.
Funny thing.
You mentioned earlier about the pandemic changing, the paradigm, what we're used to. Now we have this whole different role, or this whole different world going on, right?
Right.
We've got what we call now, as you and I've recently discovered, distributed teams, not remote workers, not virtual people, but distributed teams, right? And that hasn't still, I've seen a lot of public sector agencies still trying to go back to the norm. Supervisors and managers still trying to bring people back into the office, and people resisting that and leaving as a result, and going and finding other things and other industries that will allow them to do that. Is there anything that we can do to change that mindset?
I think Darwin has a way of changing things, Brent. I think that there will be natural consequences for losing your most qualified people simply because you want to be a toxic micromanager and be able to peek into their office instead of saying, hey, Brent, you're accountable for this, 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 and this. Get it done. And I'm not going to mess with you other than to expect that it gets done.
Absolutely.
Your best people want that. They don't want to be micromanaged. They want you to tell them what needs to be done. What are the priorities? They don't necessarily, well, they definitely don't want you to start telling them in 5-minute increments where you're at, and did you take a bathroom break, and are you in your office?
Right.
Well, no, I wasn't in my office, but as it turns out, at 6 this morning to 8 this morning, before I actually came to work, I wrote 1,500 lines of code that were pretty damn good.
Right.
So, I mean, those are your best folks, because they're doing it because they want to, not because they have to. Here's another thing. Prisoners make really shitty employees because they're prisoners.
Yeah.
And they resent being prisoners. And so you get how much discretionary effort from these employees? Oh, this much discretionary effort from those employees. And because I'm an accessibility guy, I'm going to say I made a 0 with my hands. So,
And for the podcast listeners who can't see you,
And there you go. See, everyone should be into accessibility.
that's right. Count them all. And that's true. And when you go back to that distributed learning, or excuse me, that distributed workforce type mentality, we saw this last year with the pandemic, that a lot of managers were becoming even more micro. Like, it was one thing to be micro in the office and expect somebody to sit down in front of their desk 8 hours a day and being productive, right? And treating them like children versus adults who are accountable for their own actions, right? If somebody's not accountable for their actions, well, then there's consequences for that, correct? But everybody's an adult. We're all accountable for ourselves and for our own actions, and we reap the consequences or we reap the rewards regardless. So you see a lot of this remote monitoring and devices that are tracking people's key movements and having their video cameras on so that they make sure that they're sitting at their desk. What's your opinion about that? It's a rhetorical question.
Great, I think it's a great way to get rid of your best employees.
That's right. I agree with you.
I mean, look, it's not a surprise that folks without any leadership talent or managerial talent look to accounting mechanisms instead of leading and managing to get things done, right? But one of my mentors long ago told me, never mistake an accounting mechanism for your leadership responsibility, right? We need to count the money. We need to have roughly, this person was in the office here, it wasn't in the office there, it was taking a vacation day. That's cool. That's accountability. Everyone likes accountability. Everyone who's a decent employee likes accountability. What folks don't like is this atmosphere of distrust, because here's a funny thing. How do you earn trust? You have to give trust to get trust. Here's another funny thing. The person with the most authority and the most power has to give trust first, because the person without the authority and the power actually are afraid. And so it's hard for them to trust.
Absolutely.
But as a leader of an organization, you have a ton of power. Why are you so afraid to give a little trust?
Absolutely. And you wield the invisible gun too, right? Just your very presence in some instances changes the very dynamic of a conversation, changes the dynamic of a meeting, changes the dynamic of a lot of things, a lot of interactions. So you can be careful of that as well.
My sister Deb is the co-founder of a company called Grayscalable, which services startups with HR services. And early in my leadership journey, she said to me, don't forget, every time you speak to an employee, you're holding a megaphone up to their ear. Speak softly.
Right.
And that was it was fantastic and phenomenal advice.
Yeah.
And I've repeated it as often as I can.
That is phenomenal advice, actually. And it goes, I wrote something similar in my book about, I'm 6'4". I'm a very Sasquatchy tall individual and can be very intimidating to some, especially who are, a lot shorter than I am. So I have a tendency to be intimidating in that fact, whether you want to or not. It comes off that way. So there's a lot of times to where I've instructed folks like, well, if you're a big guy like me or somebody who's tall, sit down and have a conversation. Don't hover over them unless you're President Johnson and want to use it to your advantage. There's a time and a place, right? There's a time and a place, like you said, commanding.
No, that's good advice too.
Yeah, but be a little more on their level and speak softly, right? Speak softly and carry a big stick. Is that what I believe the term was? So where do you think this is going to go? Do you think we're going to stay? I know the private sector has already said, and we've seen these trends growing from the distributed teams going, pretty much full on remote all the time.
Wait. Can I stop you there for a second?
Sure.
I have to say my thing about like private sector versus public sector. So if you're in a private sector organization that is large enough, this is indistinguishable from government. My time early in my career with some of the largest consumer products companies in the world in New York City convinced me of that. I didn't understand what bureaucracy was until I joined one of those. And then I was ready for government. So all of these bad behaviors, I mean, as you were alluding to earlier, Brent, about the military, there's bad military commanders, there's good military commanders. Same is true for public sector and commercial sector, private sector, however you want to call
Yeah, very true.
it. Unless you want to fight about that, we can fight about it.
No, I agree with you 100%. You and I have had that conversation many times, and yes, having spent time in both at the federal government level, at the state government level, at the local government level, as well as working in the private sector, and even running my own company at one point in my career, I know there's vast differences, but there's a lot of similarities. And leadership is a universal thing. You don't have to be a specific person in leadership to be great at it in the public sector and then be horrible at it in the private sector. It just doesn't work that way. So you're absolutely right. But from a remote or distributed workforce, and we see
Yeah.
that in the private sector that's going to stay. And I've seen it in some government agencies. It is starting to stick, but a lot of them again are trying to go back to that old way of doing things. Do you think that there's a way that's going to change over time?
See, I'm going to fight you here, Brent, because that's safe. Because you're 6 foot something, and on the other side of the screen, this is really good for me.
Right, there you go.
But I'm going to seriously, I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I'm telling you, I make it my business to stay in touch with the business community here in Asheville, and there are some businesses that are fully remote, but there are just as many that are saying, you got to come back to the office. Or they didn't do any distributed work the entire time. And but to your so that's my pushback, is there are government agencies that are fully remote. In fact, I mean, I have some dear friends who work for the federal government. They're not expecting them back. And yet there are some local governments that are expecting folks back last month when the surge was happening at the beginning of Delta practically.
Right.
So I think it's a mixed bag, but to the heart of your question, what's it going to take? I just think the natural consequences are going to occur. Now, look, there are some jobs that, just to get super HR geeky for a minute, there are some jobs that have a BFOQ, a bona fide occupational qualification of, you have to touch this thing, right? My better half works in manufacturing. They've got to be in there on the line. And you can't get past that. And you and I, Brent, have field technicians who interact with officers every day, and they've got to be able to touch their phone. They got to be able to touch their radio. They've got to be able to, get in the car and see what's up with the patrol car laptop. So if there's a bona fide occupational qualification of being there, no one cares. They got into that job. They understood that. They got to show up every day. There's pros and cons about it. But what you're talking about is you have no bona fide occupational qualification to be there, and yet some jerk is saying, I want you in a seat so that A, I can spend money on real estate, B, I can spend money on heating and cooling, and C, oh yeah, by the way, I can just micromanage the crap out of you.
Yes.
So, I mean, of course those folks are going to push back. But I also think that as younger folk enter the workforce, and I spoke about this at a conference that you and I were at recently, those younger folks have spent their entire lives making relationships and getting stuff done online. I don't care if it was, well, I'm dating myself if I say World of Warcraft, whatever the current multiplayer massive online role.
MMORPG.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the latest one is, they've spent their entire lives making relationships and getting things done in a distributed way. So when those folks start businesses, when those folks are, I mean, I know a person who has a brokerage here in town, it's all remote, got rid of the office, right? I think it's just, it is an artifact of the inability to change with the times. Mm-hmm. And it will go away eventually, but not before there's suffering. There will be suffering because a funny thing happens when your best and brightest exit the organization. The organization ends up not doing well. And I'll tell you a quick story.
Atrophy.
There's a, right.
Talent
all of a
atrophy.
sudden the organization does really badly. Mm-hmm. And then the chief executive micromanager, who is the cause of that, blames it on market forces. And I do some coaching and I do some consulting outside of City of Asheville. And in fact, there was something just happened to the screen, but we're okay now. But in fact, that is a true story. Every other organization in that industry was going gangbusters during the pandemic. But this organization decided to get all micromanaging and tell people to come in during the pandemic. And now they are blaming the fact that no one knows what they're doing. Everyone's new crew. There's no institutional knowledge. And oh, by the way, deadlines are being missed. Shipments aren't being made. And it's just market forces. We didn't have anything to do with that.
Yeah. Blame it on the market.
Or whatever. There'll be scapegoats. I guarantee you, whatever bad thing happens because you push your best and brightest out of your workforce because you are inflexible and a tyrant, they will blame it on market forces. They'll blame it on something else. They won't blame it on themselves because, lack of self-awareness is one of the keystones of being a toxic manager, leader.
And to your point, I want to reverse that a little bit and say, I want to ask you, how are you doing things in your organization?
Micromanaging the snot out of people. So how do you mean? How are we doing things? I mean, I'll give you a little overview. The folks who have a bona fide occupational need to be in the office are in the office. The folks who don't necessarily want to be in the office at all aren't in the office. But that's where we started, Brent. We said, look, we're starting with the bona fide occupational qualification. We're continuing with what is your preference? Because there are folks, and obviously in the world of IT, they're mostly developers who just want to be heads down and coding and getting in the flow and all that stuff. Yeah, cool, great. You got a lot of GitHub check-ins. That's awesome. Same is true if you're a help desk person. I mean, it's pretty clear who's working and who's not.
I was going to say,
that's where we began.
Did you do any benchmarks? Did you notice any changes from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic? And did you at any time come back to the office before making those decisions of saying, all right, look, you have to be here. Sorry, that's your job, but you guys can go wherever.
The biggest issue, because we do by metrics, the biggest issue is people were working too much. It was the biggest issue, and I hear that everywhere. Folks who don't have borders and don't have boundaries anymore. Certainly in the first 6 to 12 months of the pandemic, we were getting all kinds of burnout issues because folks were just working too much.
Yes.
But that is the responsibility of a leader, is to say, look, we care about you. And so we embarked on an employee well-being initiative a few months into the pandemic and just really talk to our employees. All the hiring managers who work with me just talk to employees and said, look, I looked at your I looked at your time card, I looked at your payroll, I looked at your whatever it was, and I'm really worried about you. How about taking some time off? Well, there's nowhere to go. Yeah, but how about like not in front of your laptop? And we did a survey. We saw, what are people looking for? What are they missing? Like every other organization, we experimented with some morale building activities, including a holiday party where everyone gets to watch each other build a gingerbread house and fail spectacularly and laugh uproariously and all that stuff. Um, but I think it begins with, if you care about employees, really care, not how are you, how's your family, why aren't you working, right? But if you really take care of folks and you are concerned with folks and you want folks to be okay, they know it. And you're going to get their best efforts. And when there's something wrong, they're going to let you know, as opposed to, you ever have a splinter that you don't take care of and it festers below the surface? Then it gets all infected, and I don't want to gross anyone out, but it's nasty. That's what problems unaddressed do in an organization. But
Absolutely.
if you're the kind of person who's just, pounding their fist on the desk and saying, tacitly, right? You're not even asking, you're just saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's not going to go well.
No, and it never does. And that's exactly, to your point earlier, that's how you push people out the door. And like
It
you
is.
said, that's a talent atrophy is what we like to call it. And
I like it.
it rears its ugly head. Yeah, we had a policy prior to the pandemic here in Chattanooga, and that was a work from anywhere policy. We didn't call it a telecommuting policy. It wasn't telecommuting. It was a work from anywhere. You come into the office, and the rule for the city was you had to come into the office. We kind of changed that a little bit in IT and said, well, why do my developers need to be sitting in a cubicle or behind a screen here in a building that we're paying for, when they could be anywhere? And we wanted to have that work-life balance, right? That because life doesn't stop at 8 o'clock in the morning and then resume at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Life goes on throughout the day. You have appointments, your kids have things, your family has things, and you have to tend to these things. So we tried to make
Right.
it to where it was flexible enough to where folks could pretty much, as long as they, like you said, productive, and as long as they do what they're supposed to do, who cares if they're staring out the window for 20 minutes? Who cares if they're driving across town to take their ill mother to a doctor's appointment, or to their kid to wherever, or to the vet, or who cares, right? So we had that policy in place, what we call the work from anywhere policy, before the pandemic. And even then, we had metrics on our productivity at that point. And then after, post pandemic, when everybody was pretty much 100% remote, save for a few folks in the service desk who had to be on site. And like you said, working with the fire department, the police department, you kind of have to be there to do that. Productivity went up. Like it skyrocketed. We got more code written. We got more projects done ahead of schedule, on time, and for less money. And then when we had to go back to the office originally, before the second spike hit with the Delta variant, productivity went back down, and morale went back down. And now you see I've already said, we're going to be 100% remote all the time unless you absolutely have to be in the office. And also we have another rule, which is no meetings on Fridays unless you absolutely have to.
I like it.
Finish your day and finish your work week so that you don't take work home with you. But I digress. But so we saw that shift, and I'm thinking a lot of other organizations are also starting to see that the productivity and the morale, especially when you talk about workplace happiness and you talk
Yeah.
about that work-life balance, that's a key to retaining employees, especially when you talk about us in the public sector, where we don't pay what the private sector pays. We pay far less. So
So let me suggest, though, Brent, and again, I can push back on you because, you're on the other end of the screen and I'm like, 5'10" and you're
I know
six
where
foot a
you live,
million.
Jonathan.
But let me push back on you seriously because I think that enhanced productivity can come at a price in that when
Yeah,
folks are remote, they tend to just hammer down longer and longer and longer, and they're up, because they're not commuting, they're working 9 hours, they're working 10 hours. And
yes,
I think it comes at a price, and I think that price is burnout. And so I would suggest that what you want is that balancing act where you're optimizing your folks' time, whether or not it's in the office or whether or not it's work from anywhere. I think you're just looking for an optimization
sure.
where, yeah. So I mean, and there are lots of distractions at the office, but there are also lots of distractions at home. And one of the things I try to coach folks is that there are there are certainly a ton of distractions everywhere, and but it's also okay to have some distractions both in the office and remotely. And you know what I mean. You're getting a cup of coffee
Yep.
at the office. Somebody tries to talk your ear off, and that's fine for the first couple of minutes. But then after the first couple of minutes, you're like, well, I got work to do. I got to go. And some people are bad at that.
Oh yeah.
And so, that sucks up time that you might not want sucked up, but it's inevitable and it's going to happen. And there's also some things at home, and it's just a matter of managing them. And you know what I mean?
Basic
It's
time
not any
management.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just time management.
Yeah. I agree with you. There's a you bring up a valid point, and I do see that because we've had some of that. I've had employees that would work at all hours of the night and would be
Right.
working all night, and we'd literally have to tell them, "Look, you need to take a day off, just stop."
Right.
Because we don't want you burn, especially the good employees who are really dedicated and really hardworking. You don't want them burn out. You want to do things.
Mhm.
So, we try to balance that as much as we can because we're not there to, again, it's distributed work, right? So we can't, we have no idea whether they're sitting in their bedroom at, 11:30 at night, hacking away on their keyboard or on their
Right.
laptop. So we try to do what we can to encourage that balance and for them to disconnect and step away. But at the same time, we try to get some of that social interactivity that you get in the office that you don't get being a distributed team. So, have you found any ways to do that? I know little private water cooler things on Zoom or anything along those lines that you could share with us.
We have an IT services uh, chat room that's called Water Cooler, and it is supposed to be entirely for non-work. In fact, when a hiring manager posts something about work, or when I post something about work accidentally, we all get held accountable by the others. So, it's just a place where the stuff that you would share at the water cooler, you just share, you know, whether it's a picture, video of your kids, whether it's a music video that you thought was awesome. It's the place where we can be a little bit human and spend that 10 minutes that you might spend at the water cooler together. We've also done events and played some online games. We've done hybrid events where uh, we get together for a breakfast with separate servings, very COVID friendly or very COVID anti friendly, right?
Right.
Uh, and and so we have a good camera, a good room microphone to make sure that folks are occupied and a large screen and all that stuff for folks who don't want to show up on site. To be honest, I think the hybrid is tough because folks have to remember, oh yeah, there's the screen. Let me go interact with the screen, and make those folks feel welcome. So it's tough because what you really want to do when you go to an in-person event is be in person,
Yeah.
and see those people who you haven't chatted with in forever, and enjoy that.
That interactory, yeah,
It's
and that
possible.
camaraderie. And as you and
Yeah.
I at the event we were at in recently in San Diego, noticed that too with the hybrid, the folks that were not actually present and could not participate in the conversations that were going on behind the scenes that they could have benefited from. So it is very challenging. It's very difficult.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it goes a long way to morale as well. I think some of those hybrid situations have a tendency to kill morale, more so than increase morale. Yeah, we're trying to include you on the screen, but it's not really kind of the same thing, and we've noticed some of that as well.
After meetings that
Yeah,
don't include the people on the screen, and then
exactly.
the people on the screen find out about the after meeting, and then that's really a killer.
Yeah, hey, wait, I could have been part of that. I needed to know that. That was good information that I needed to
Exactly.
have. Right.
Hmm.
So, any thought about how this new paradigm is going to affect us from a digital transformation standpoint in general? I know we've started with leadership, and now we're kind of translating into this distinct thing that we deal with a lot in the public sector, more so than the private sector, which is transforming ourselves digitally.
To be honest, I think it's just part of digital transformation. And there was a great meme on Twitter that said, "What pushed you furthest in your digital transformation efforts?" Answer one, CEO. Answer two, CIO. Answer three, CMO. Answer four, COVID-19. Circle.
Right.
Right? And I think it's true. I mean, the pandemic has just pushed us to do things a little bit earlier than we would have otherwise. As far as what's next, I think we'll do a good job if we don't roll back, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I
that's the
think
key.
if we don't do right 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, that'll be great. If we do 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, okay. But uh, I I think we're going to continue to see innovations in job sharing, in temporary work. Folks have this heightened awareness of, you know, everyone's known someone who's died of this.
Yes.
And so I think folks have a heightened awareness of, what am I doing with this one life that I have? My father used to say, a musician, life is not a dress rehearsal. And I think more and more people are understanding, this is it. This is the trip. This is the only trip. And so folks that can, folks with the privilege that don't have to work full time, are, I think we're going to see more earlier retirements. Folks are going to be happier with less. They don't need the McMansion. They just want to enjoy their life and not, necessarily be 9 to 5 every day. But I think 9 to 5 has already been kind of shaken, and I think it's about to get stirred,
Yeah,
if you know what I mean.
I agree.
So
Any final thoughts for us, Jonathan?
I appreciate you including me on your show, Brent. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for a fun time. It's always good to banter with you.
Well, thanks for being on part of the show, and I'll see you next time I'm in Asheville. We'll get another coffee.
Outstanding.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan. All right, everybody. That's our show for this evening. Thanks for joining us. Join me next week when I have a wonderful guest, Ashley Jacobs, the Deputy County Manager and CIO of Wake County, North Carolina, where we're going to talk about innovation in the public sector. And one last thing I want to mention to all of you, if you want more insight onto leadership and things, pick up a copy of my book at valuedrivenbook.com. You can get it on Amazon, Target, wherever, but if you get it at valuedrivenbook.com, use the code CivicSparks15 and get 15% off until the end of this month. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks.